Hi, in this tutorial I'm going to show you the second method I use for making these ultra fine wired wool feathers, which are suitable for 3D needle felting projects or any other use you can think for them really. So in the first tutorial I showed you how to make these using a product called Hemming Web or Wonder Web, and one of the things I mentioned was that you are sort of restricted by the width of the Hemming Web. Now you can layer this up when you make these feathers to make fatter ones, but it's a bit fiddly. What is far easier is to use another product, which is an iron-on adhesive, and the one that I like to use is called Heat and Bond Ultra Hold, and it comes in a red packet. It comes in sheets, but it also comes in these great big rolls, which as you can see give you a lot more freedom to create larger pieces. So if you wanted to create larger feathers or wings for dragonflies, butterflies, fairies, or even leaves, this would probably be the better way to achieve what you were trying to make. So to make these feathers, what you will need is some Heat and Bond Ultra Hold. I bought mine off the internet. I'm pretty sure they sell it in craft shops and haberdasheries too. It's not terribly expensive and it's a great thing to keep in your kit. So I have cut a small rectangle of my Heat and Bond just for the purposes of this, but obviously you can cut it to any shape depending on what you're intending to make. You're going to need some floristry wire again for the spine of your feather. I like to use a paper covered floristry wire for two reasons really. First of all, it adds a realistic element to your feathers because the spine does shine through the wool and you can see that, so it makes your feathers look really feather-like. The second reason for using a paper covered wire is the paper grabs to the iron-on adhesive, so it just helps to stabilise everything and encourage bonding properly. I use a product called Hamilworth number 28. Okay, so you've got your Ultra Bond, you've got your wire, you're going to need some snips for cutting your wire, you're going to need some fibres. Now again, I'm using merino wool fibres here, but that's just because that's what I use in my day-to-day work. I'm sure any fibres would work with this really, because all you're doing is bonding them to the iron-on adhesive. So anything that will bond, it will work. And you're also going to need a sharp pair of needlepoint scissors that snip right to the tip. And you're going to use these for cutting out your feather and adding all these details in at the end that are going to make your feather look really realistic. Okay, so let's pop these out the way and begin. So first things first, you're going to need to lay out your first layer for your feather. And you don't want to be too heavy-handed doing this, because if you lay out too much fibre, it just doesn't adhere properly and it all fluffs up and comes away. So you don't want to really be able to see your fabric underneath. This piece of fabric I've just popped over my ironing board because I don't know if you can see here. Sometimes when you're making things like this, the iron-on adhesive sort of creeps out and gets stuck to your board. So it's just to protect my surface so that when I'm doing other tasks later, it's not going to get tangled up in that. So there's my first layer. Now I'm going to add my iron-on adhesive. Now I'm going to follow the instructions on my Heat and Bond. So the first thing it says to do is to lay your Heat and Bond down onto the surface you're sticking to, glue side down. Now I don't know if you can see this terribly well on video. One side it has like a sheet adhesive on it and the other side is just paper. So we're going to pop this down on top of our feather with the adhesive facing down towards the fibres we're trying to stick to and the paper facing upwards. So once that's on there, all we're going to do now is push down with a hot dry iron for 2 seconds, and that's going to transfer the glue to our fibres. Okay, here we go. 1, 2. And that's it. We'll pop our hot iron out the way and then we can just lift this gently off the ironing surface. Now at this stage depending on how hot it is, be careful. I like to use my hands just to encourage bonding the whole time, to push those fibres into the glue. So once it's cool enough to handle, you want to peel off your paper backing. Oops, here we go. And now we can discard that bit of paper, and as you can see, we now have fibres with a sheet of iron-on adhesive that is stuck to it. So it's kind of like creating your very own iron-on patch, I guess. So we're going to lay that back down. So we've got fibres adhered to the iron-on adhesive, and now we're going to add our wire spine to our piece. So again, you need to think about which is the end of your project, which is the base of the feather, so the end that's going to be closest to your project, because that's where we want to leave our wire protruding. Depending on the size and weight of your feather, or whatever it is you're making, will depend on how much you want to leave out the end, and sort of the size of your overall project. I like to leave about 1 to 2 inches. I find that's usually enough, and I like to cut off any excess at this stage, just because it sort of gets in your way really when you're doing it, but you need to adjust it to suit your own needs. So now that we've added our spine, we're going to put our final layer of wool fibres over the top. Again, not too heavy-handed, just a light pinch, and we're just going to follow the shape of the feather and cover this other side. There we go. Make sure we cover the spine too, and up to the tip. There we go. And I'm not too worried at the moment about these bits sort of laying out and poking out the side, because once we've bonded this, we're going to cut it out anyway, so we're going to lose all that. So the next thing you need to do is double check the instructions on your particular brand of iron-on adhesive. Mine says to push down on each side for 8 seconds. If you're using a very lightweight fabric, so say you were using wool fibres on one side and a lightweight cotton to back the underside of your feather, you may find you can adjust your pressing times. It just depends on the type of material you're using and how long it takes the heat to transfer through and to melt the iron-on adhesive so that it bonds with it. So I find the wool takes slightly longer than 8 seconds, so I'm going to go for 10. So we just push straight down. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Oh, that can happen. My feather has stuck to the base of my iron. Just gently peel that off using the spine. And again, just making sure it's not too hot, because you don't want to burn yourself. You just want to use your hands to gently encourage all the fibres to bond into the heat and bond. Right, and as it cools, you'll see it starts to retain its shape better and becomes a bit more stable. Right, so that was our first side. We're going to flip it over, repeat on the other side. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. There we go. Ooh. I think my iron needs a bit of a clean, so it's just scuffing the fibres up as it comes away. But as you can see, you just use your hands and encourage it to all bond together properly, and they soon squash back in. Okay, at this stage, all we want to do is now start cutting out our rough feather shape. So you sort of need to be visualising where your lines are going to go and follow around. So I'm going to follow the curve of my spine, which heads in this direction. So I'm going to leave these few fluffy bits at the base of the feather, just to add a note of realism, and then I'm going to follow all the way up to the top of the feather towards what will be my tip. There we go, get rid of that bit, we don't need that bit. And then I'm going to repeat on the other side. And at this stage you will have quite a realistic looking feather already, so you can decide to use it in your projects as it is, or you can go on as I am to add some extra details to it. So as you can see, there you go, you've already got quite a realistic looking feather shape. So the next step that I'm going to do is I want to create a frayed end on my feather. So I'm just going to take my scissors and just snip into the end with lots of fine snips. Now sometimes you might miscut and accidentally cut a little nick out, but don't worry, because in nature the ends of the feathers clump together and they can look like they have missing sections from it. So there you can see, and I'm just going to use my fingers just to rough that up a bit. There you go, and I'm just pulled out there. Okay, and I think I'm going to cut in a few notches out of the side as I have done on this one. And to do that, I'm just going to cut sort of a wiggly line down towards the spine, but not too close to it. And then just above where I've cut this out, I'm going to add a little curve just ever so slightly and make a little slither, like cut out a slither, so that there is, I guess you're trying to create a sky gap between the two pieces. Can you see? Okay, and then you sort of have to think about how many of these you want in. So you can put in lots, you can put in a few, you can put in none at all. When I was trying to work out how to cut these in, what I found really helped was cutting some feather shapes out of paper and having a little practice at the different techniques, so that by the time I came to working on the wool, I wasn't getting cross and frustrated if I messed them up, because the ones that I'd messed up were all on paper. Alright, let's give it one more, just one more small one up at the top here. Move that slither. Now at this stage I like to just give it one final last press, just to make sure everything has bonded together properly. It's a bit like the Wonder Web. Can you see here we've got some fibres that haven't quite adhered because I was probably a bit heavy handed when I laid them out. Now you can pull them off like this, but with the heat and bond the adhesion is much stronger, so you can accidentally end up ripping off all your fibres. So I would suggest just snipping off the ones that are really big and baggy, and then giving it another press and using your hands to encourage these few stragglers back into the bond. Okay, so we'll start on this side. Quick press. This side's pretty well bonded. Okay, and again I think it's just my iron is causing them to jump up like that. There you go. Flip it over, give the same attention to the other side. Oh, that's bonding really nicely now. There we go, a few seconds on the other side. Okay, push down, encourage it all to bond. There you go, peel it off, let it cool. And then what I like to do is, where I've given it a last press, you can see it sort of squashes some of the fibres out at the side, so I just like to give it a last little trim to smarten it up, leaving my fluffy bits at the bottom because I really like them on a feather. Oops. There we go. There we go, take that bit off there. And there you have it. One ultra fine wired wool feather suitable for 3D needle felting projects or any other use you can think of them really. Can be twisted, bent and repositioned.